I'm about to give you a detailed look at all the Bigfoot evidence that humans have discovered to date, plus a whole lot more that's probably being kept from us. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, the wild man of the woods. These names have echoed across cultures and continents for centuries, describing a creature that science has yet to classify, but thousands of witnesses insist is real. Today we're going to dive deep into the evidence. The footprints, the DNA, the videos, the eyewitness accounts, and even the historical records. But we won't stop there. We'll also explore claims from credible individuals who have good reason to believe much more evidence exists, but has been deliberately hidden from the public by authorities who fear the societal repercussions of confirming Bigfoot's existence. Let's jump into it. Eyewitness accounts, the backbone of Bigfoot lore. Eyewitness accounts form the largest body of evidence for Bigfoot's existence. As of today, over 10,000 documented sightings have been reported in North America alone, with most sightings occurring in the Pacific Northwest, the Appalachian Mountains, and the Great Lakes region. These reports aren't just from casual hikers or over-enthusiastic campers either. They include stories from seasoned hunters, police officers, park rangers, and even military personnel. One particularly credible account comes from Dr. John Bindernagel, a wildlife biologist who spent decades studying Sasquatch evidence. Bindernagel recounted an encounter shared by a hunter in British Columbia, Canada. Quote, "The hunter watched the creature for several minutes. It was kneeling by a creek, drinking water with cupped hands. He described its massive shoulders, conical head, and dark, shaggy hair. The hunter told me, 'I've hunted bears and moose my whole life, and I know what I saw. This wasn't a bear. It wasn't even close.'" End quote. In another account, Bob Strain, a retired firefighter, detailed a sighting in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Quote, "I saw it from a distance of about 80 yards. It was walking on two legs, taller than any human I've ever seen, covered in dark brown hair. Its stride was effortless, almost fluid, and it turned to look at me for just a moment before vanishing into the tree line." End quote. Ron Moorhead, known for recording the famous Sierra sounds, described, quote, "We not only saw movement in the woods, but heard sounds, language-like chatter that I've never encountered before. These weren't any animals I've ever known." End quote. Law enforcement officers have also shared first-hand experiences. One of the most compelling comes from David Politis, a former police officer and current Bigfoot researcher, who spoke with a retired sheriff in California. Quote, "The sheriff told me he encountered a Bigfoot during a late-night patrol. It crossed the road in front of his vehicle, moving with a fluidity and speed that no human could replicate. He said, 'The way it moved, I knew it wasn't someone in a suit. It was alive.'" End quote. Although the world is awash with recent encounters, the Bigfoot phenomenon isn't new. For centuries, Native American tribes across North America have told stories of large, hairy, man-like creatures that inhabit the forests and mountains. Known by names like Sasquatch in Salish, Oma in Shoshone, and Semekwes in Lummi, these beings are often described as guardians of nature, living in harmony with the wilderness while avoiding human contact. Chief Dan George, a famous Canadian Indigenous leader, spoke about these creatures as part of his people's oral traditions. He shared, quote, "The Sasquatch is not a myth to us. It is part of our history, as real as the bear or the eagle. Our ancestors have seen them, and some still do. These beings are part of the land." End quote. One particularly striking account comes from a Northern Cheyenne elder who recounted a personal encounter. Quote, "I saw it with my own eyes. Tall, covered in hair, moving with a grace that no man has. We've always known they're out there. They are our brothers of the forest, ancient and wise, but they keep to their own path." End quote. For many Indigenous communities, Sasquatch is more than just a creature. It is a symbol of the wild, untamed spirit of the land, passed down through generations in stories, ceremonies, and stunning artwork. These traditions not only lend credibility to the modern sightings, but also root the phenomenon in centuries of cultural knowledge. The Bigfoot phenomenon isn't limited to North America either. Reports of similar creatures, known by different names, come from cultures across the globe. These international accounts, though varied, share remarkable similarities with the North American Sasquatch, strengthening the case for its existence as a widespread undiscovered species. The Yeti of the Himalayas. The Yeti, also known as the Abominable Snowman, is said to inhabit the remote mountainous regions of Nepal and Tibet. Descriptions often include a creature covered in gray or white fur standing between 6 and 10 feet tall. Renowned mountaineer Reinhold Messner, who has summited Mount Everest multiple times, claimed to have seen the Yeti during an expedition in 1986. He wrote, quote, "It was a dark, upright figure, far taller than any human. It moved swiftly and silently, blending into the rocky terrain. I'll never forget its piercing, watchful eyes." End quote. Additionally, in 1951, Eric Shipton, another legendary mountaineer, photographed what are now famous Yeti footprints near Mount Everest. The prints measured 13 inches in length and showed a stride pattern too long for a human. The Yowie of Australia. In Australia, the Yowie is the counterpart to Bigfoot, reportedly dwelling in the dense forests of Queensland and New South Wales. Witnesses often describe it as a large, hair-covered hominid with an intimidating presence. Dean Harrison, a leading Yowie researcher, described his own encounter. Quote, "It was over 7 feet tall, with reddish-brown hair and deep-set eyes. It stood there, watching me, and I could feel its intelligence. It wasn't just an animal. It was something more." End quote. The Almas of Central Asia. The Almas is a cryptid reported in the remote mountains and forests of Mongolia and Central Asia. Unlike other Bigfoot-like creatures, the Almas is described as being more human-like, with a smaller stature and features resembling early hominins. Professor Boris Porshnev, a Soviet anthropologist, studied Almas sightings extensively and stated, quote, "The Almas appears to be a relic hominid, possibly a surviving Neanderthal or Denisovan. Its anatomical descriptions align more closely with ancient human relatives than with modern humans or apes." End quote. The Mapinguari of the Amazon rainforest. In South America, the Mapinguari is a cryptid said to roam the Amazon rainforest. Descriptions vary, but many accounts depict it as a large, hairy creature with a distinct musky odor. Some reports suggest it may be a ground-dwelling sloth thought to be extinct, while others liken it to a regional variant of Bigfoot. Dr. David Oren, a biologist who has studied Mapinguari sightings, stated, quote, "The eyewitness testimonies are remarkably consistent. The creature is said to be intelligent, avoiding human contact, and leaving behind tracks that don't match any known species." End quote. These international accounts provide further evidence that Bigfoot-like creatures are not confined to North America. Their global presence, combined with the consistency of descriptions across cultures, suggests we could be dealing with a widespread, undiscovered species. While it's true that some of the tens of thousands of Bigfoot sightings worldwide could be attributed to hoaxes, lies, or cases of mistaken identity, it's simply implausible that every single account can be dismissed in this way. Many witnesses, hunters, hikers, and even law enforcement officials, as we've covered, share their stories with nothing to gain but everything to lose. Risking ridicule and damage to their reputations, these individuals consistently describe similar creatures and behaviors. The sheer volume and consistency of these reports, paired with the credibility of some witnesses, make it unreasonable to claim that these are all fabrications or errors. Footprints. Hard evidence on the ground. Footprints are some of the most tangible pieces of evidence linked to Bigfoot. To date, researchers have documented and cast over 1,500 individual footprints, many showing features that are nearly impossible to fake. These prints range from 15 to 24 inches in length, with widths up to 10 inches. One of the most striking features of these footprints is the presence of dermal ridges, the textured lines found on human footprints and feet. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University, has studied hundreds of these casts and notes, quote, "The footprints display anatomy and biomechanics consistent with a living creature. The mid-tarsal break, a flexible joint in the middle of the foot, is absent in humans, but present in these casts, indicating an unknown primate species." End quote. Dr. Grover Krantz, another anthropologist, emphasized the authenticity of the prints from the Bossberg Cripplefoot tracks. Quote, "The deformities in the tracks show anatomical consistency with a living foot. It would be nearly impossible for a hoaxer to fake these abnormalities so accurately." End quote. Additionally, these footprints show a stride length far beyond normal human capability, with some measuring up to 50 inches between steps. The famous Bluff Creek tracks, discovered near the site of the Patterson-Gimlin film, are among the most studied examples, and they remain a cornerstone of Bigfoot evidence. Videos. The Patterson-Gimlin film and beyond. The Patterson-Gimlin film, shot in 1967, remains the most famous and controversial piece of evidence for Bigfoot's existence. Recorded in Bluff Creek, California, the film shows a creature walking upright through the forest. turning to look at the camera before disappearing into the trees. Skeptics have long claimed the film depicts a person in a suit, but experts in biomechanics and costume design have raised serious doubts in this theory. Hollywood special effects artist Bill Munns has said, quote, "The creature in the film displays muscle movement, proportions, and a natural gait that would be extremely difficult to replicate even with today's technology." End quote. I go into much more detail about why this famous film is authentic in other videos of mine, and I'll link those in the description for anyone interested. Beyond the Patterson-Gimlin film, there are other notable pieces of footage that have withstood intense scrutiny over the years. The Marble Mountain footage, for example, shows a distant but distinct humanoid shape climbing a ridge, while the Paul Freeman footage presents another compelling encounter with what appears to be a large, hairy figure. Despite skeptics' efforts, these videos, like the Patterson-Gimlin film, remain unexplained, further strengthening the case for Bigfoot's existence. Audio recordings. Bigfoot's mysterious voice. Some of the most intriguing evidence for Bigfoot comes in the form of audio recordings, capturing eerie sounds that experts have struggled to explain. These recordings, gathered from remote areas of North America, feature vocalizations unlike any known animal or human sound, the Sierra sounds. One of the most famous examples is the Sierra sounds, recorded by Ron Moorhead and Al Berry in the 1970s in the Sierra Nevada mountains. These recordings feature guttural growls, whoops, and what some experts believe are linguistic patterns resembling a language. Scott Nelson, a retired U.S. Navy cryptolinguist, analyzed the recordings and concluded, quote, "The vocalizations have all the hallmarks of a language, phonemes, syntax, and structure. These aren't random sounds, and they're beyond the capabilities of humans to replicate unaided." End quote. Nelson's analysis has been supported by audio engineers and animal vocalization experts, who also pointed out that the recordings feature a range and depth of sound beyond human capability. Dr. Lynn Rogers, a wildlife biologist, remarked, quote, "The calls have an incredible range of pitch and frequency that don't match any known species, nor can they be attributed to a hoax. It's unlike anything I've studied in the wild." End quote. The Ohio Howl. Another compelling recording is the Ohio Howl, captured in 1994 by Matt Moneymaker, founder of the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or the BFRO. The howl is characterized by a long, siren-like wail, distinct from the vocalizations of any known animal. Dr. Jeff Meldrum, who has analyzed the audio, stated, quote, "The Ohio Howl doesn't match the calls of wolves, coyotes, or any other known predator in the region. Its tonal quality and sheer power suggest an animal with exceptional lung capacity, something far larger than a human." End quote. Animal behaviorist David Ellis, who has studied numerous Bigfoot audio recordings, observed, quote, "The Ohio Howl is consistent with other suspected Sasquatch vocalizations. The patterns and intervals between the sounds suggest intentional communication rather than random noise." End quote. Additional recordings. Beyond these famous examples, there are numerous other audio recordings collected by researchers and eyewitnesses over the years. One such recording, captured in Oregon in 2016, features loud, echoing whoops, followed by tree knocks, a form of potential communication also associated with Bigfoot behavior. Sound technician Chris Spencer, who analyzed this and other recordings, noted, quote, "What stands out is the dynamic range and power of these vocalizations. They exceed what any known animal in these areas can produce, and their repetitive nature suggests an intentional attempt to communicate." End quote. These audio recordings, coupled with expert analysis, provide yet another layer of evidence supporting the existence of an undiscovered primate. If these sounds aren't human, and they aren't from any known animal, what are we hearing? DNA and physical evidence. In recent years, DNA studies have added a new dimension to Bigfoot research. The most prominent and controversial is the study led by Dr. Melba Ketchum, a geneticist who analyzed over 100 purported Bigfoot DNA samples collected from across North America. These samples included hair, blood, saliva, and tissue, all submitted by various independent researchers and eyewitnesses. The study, published in 2013, concluded that the DNA represented an unknown primate species with partial human ancestry, suggesting hybridization at some point in the past. Dr. Ketchum's team performed extensive testing, including next-generation sequencing, and found mitochondrial DNA consistent with modern humans, but nuclear DNA that didn't match any known species. Dr. Ketchum stated, quote, "The nuclear DNA was a complete enigma. It showed non-human primate markers that don't match any known species in existing genetic databases. This strongly suggests we're dealing with a novel species that shares some ancestry with humans." End quote. One particularly compelling sample came from Justin Smea, a hunter who claimed to have recovered flesh and hair from a Sasquatch he encountered in the Sierra Nevada mountains. According to the study, this tissue sample produced the same anomalous results as the other samples. Smea described the creature he shot as, quote, "massive, covered in dark brown hair, with hands and feet like a man, but much larger." End quote. Interestingly, Smea claims he left the body of the Sasquatch he shot behind out of panic. And while his story certainly seems far-fetched due to the lack of body, the existence and nature of the tissue sample he later collected were corroborated by multiple highly qualified witnesses. Another notable sample came from a property in Texas, where witnesses reported repeated Bigfoot activity. A saliva sample collected from a chewed plastic bucket lid was analyzed, and the results matched the unknown hybrid profile identified in other samples. Despite heavy criticisms from skeptics, several experts have voiced support for the study's methodology and findings. Dr. Irena Scott, a scientist with experience in genetics, stated, quote, "The level of sequencing and the attention to proper chain of custody protocols in the study were remarkable. The repeated anomalies in the nuclear DNA cannot simply be dismissed as contamination or error." End quote. Additionally, forensic analyst Dr. Christopher Laufer, who reviewed parts of the study, commented, quote, "If these findings were associated with a known animal, there would be no controversy. The skepticism exists purely because the DNA points to something we haven't classified, but the data itself is sound." End quote. Of course, the study has been met with significant pushback from mainstream science, with critics suggesting contamination or misinterpretation of data. However, Dr. Ketchum has defended the rigorous nature of the testing, stating, quote, "We used independent labs for sequencing, ensuring no bias or tampering with the results. The data is what it is, unknown nuclear DNA, combined with human mitochondrial DNA." End quote. Despite the criticism, the Ketchum study remains one of the most detailed and ambitious attempts to use modern science to classify Bigfoot as a legitimate species. Combined with other forms of evidence, the study raises the question, if the DNA doesn't match any known animal or human, then what does it belong to? Bigfoot bodies. Tales of tangible evidence. The Minnesota Iceman is perhaps the most well-known case involving a potential Bigfoot body. It was a supposed Bigfoot-like creature frozen in ice displayed in the 1960s by carnival owner Frank Hansen, who claimed it was a real specimen found in Siberia. Ivan Sanderson and Dr. Bernard Uvelmans, both respected scientists, examined the frozen creature before it was replaced with a replica. Dr. Uvelmans wrote, quote, "The creature had clear anatomical features of a hominid, not a human, but something closely related. Its frozen state revealed details that could not have been fabricated." End quote. Similarly mysterious is the infamous Dyatlov Pass incident, where 9 highly experienced hikers died under strange circumstances in 1959, with some blaming a Yeti after an eerie photo of a figure in the snow taken by one of the hikers surfaced. Reports from Russia also claim a body was recovered in the Dyatlov Pass incident, though this was later covered up. Dr. Igor Burtsev, a Russian cryptozoologist, has stated, quote, "Several credible witnesses from military circles hinted at a large, hair-covered body being retrieved, though the details remain classified," end quote. Suppressed evidence. What are they hiding? Finally, we turn to claims of evidence being suppressed. Retired park ranger Bill Lunsford has stated, quote, "Many of us had sightings or found tracks, but the official stance was silence. I got the message like everyone else. Bigfoot sightings aren't to be shared," end quote. Former forest ranger Charles E. Howard shared, quote, "We'd hear strange calls in the woods, sightings now and then, but we weren't supposed to acknowledge it. Orders came down to keep quiet. People wouldn't be ready to hear it," end quote. Similarly, David Politis, the former law enforcement officer turned Bigfoot researcher, stated, quote, "In all my years in law enforcement, I came across enough evidence to know Bigfoot was real. Yet I was told directly by superiors to leave it alone, keep it quiet. These are things the public isn't supposed to know," end quote. Retired police officer Robert Morgan added, quote, "I knew people in my department who'd seen Bigfoot, but they were afraid to speak. Careers, reputations, everything was on the line. People have been told to stay quiet," end quote. And finally, James Bobo Fay shared his perspective, quote, "I've talked to dozens of retired park rangers and cops who have seen Bigfoot but were told to drop it, to avoid panic. It's part of the job, they say," end quote. Conclusion. As you've seen, the evidence for Bigfoot is vast, varied, and compelling, yet the mystery remains unsolved. From footprints to eyewitness accounts, DNA findings to historical records, there's enough to suggest that something is definitely out there. But whether the truth is being hidden or simply waiting to be discovered, it's clear that Bigfoot remains one of the greatest enigmas of our time. So what do you think? Is the evidence convincing, or does Bigfoot remain a legend? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to this channel. And if you want to show me extra support and contribute to future projects, I'll leave a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page in the description. Thanks for watching.